Let's have a look at this here. So this is about a person called Kirat Asi. Now, if we read the title here, I'm not stupid, I've chosen to speak, says catfish victim duped for 9 years. So there's an interesting word, catfish. What does catfish mean? Well, catfish means to deceive someone on purpose online, usually to have a fake identity. And I think this was much more common in the past before we had social media. So you had things like chat rooms, and if you're speaking to someone and they gave you information about themselves, they may be lying. But today, with social media, you can fact check and see if this person actually exists. So it's quite interesting to hear about someone being catfished. Then we have the word duped. So she was misled for 9 years. That's quite a long time. So whenever I see a number, I always encourage my students to think about deduction. What does the number tell you? Firstly, is it a high number? Is it a low number? Well, when we're thinking about age, it's relative, because 9 years, if you're living until 100, 9 years could be relatively low, but still it's quite a fair chunk of your life. It's almost a decade, it's almost 10 years. So that's an incredibly long time to be misled and to be catfished. So it's quite an interesting article. It's something which provokes and sparks some interest. There's I'm not sure about you, but I love watching thrillers, and I like finding out who the person is and trying to connect the clues and connecting the dots. So this is quite interesting. So how was this person able to be duped or conned for 9 years, which is a very long time? So let's have a look at the article here. It all started with a friend request. Kirat Asi thought she had hit the jackpot when Bobby, a handsome cardiologist, got in touch with her in 2009. So this is quite a nice phrase. She hit the jackpot. So when someone plays the lottery, they are hoping to win money. And if they have the winning numbers, they've hit the jackpot. They've won an enormous prize, an incredible prize. So she thought she had hit the jackpot, and naturally you would be extremely happy about that. And it gives some description. So a handsome cardiologist. Okay, he wasn't a total stranger. The pair were both from West London's Sikh community and had friends in common. This is quite interesting, because he was not a complete stranger. So they had friends in common. So already I can see how she was able to be catfished, because there's an element of trust there when you have friends in common. So it wasn't a complete stranger. So Kirat accepted, and her online chats developed into deeper conversations before blossoming into a full-on love story. So blossoming here, if we think about flowers that start to blossom, they start off as small buds, and then they start to grow bigger and bigger, and then they fully bloom. So this is something quite romantic. It's like a romantic story, that the love story starts to brew slowly and then gains momentum. The two became more and more entangled in each other's lives, but they never met. even after years of correspondence. Bobby would provide increasingly outlandish excuses. He had a stroke. He'd been shot. He had entered witness protection. So, outlandish, these aren't normal excuses like I have the flu or I had family problems. These are excuses which are quite elaborate. So he'd been shot. He'd had a stroke. That seems understandable. But to have a succession of these quite dramatic events seems a little bit suspicious. And here, the tall tales. So if you say a tall tale, it's a story which is suspicious. There are red flags in the story, and it's a little bit suspicious. The tall tales, though, were always backed up by someone close to Bobby, also Kirat thought. So that's interesting. So there's an element of trust because the friends that they have in common were able to validate his stories. So I can see how she would trust this story, even if it is extremely outlandish. In truth, she was the victim of a wildly elaborate and traumatizing catfishing scheme. After 9 years, when the excuses ran thin, Kirat finally came face to face with Bobby. So the excuses ran thin. So it's when the excuses start to become less and less believable. So he could say he had a stroke, but if he says he had a stroke 5 times, or if he entered witness protection 10 times, someone would naturally start to suspect, hey, something is fishy here, something is a bit dodgy, it doesn't sound quite right. So she's beginning to suspect things. So Kirat finally came face to face with Bobby, but she didn't recognize the person in front of her. The person she'd been messaging was her female cousin Simran, who had been the brains behind everything. So when you are the brains behind something, you are the person creating the plans. So if we think about big companies, we have things like Tesla, and people think the brains behind that is Elon Musk. It's the same with other big companies like Apple or Google. So the brains behind someone is the person with the intelligence to deceive someone or to do something. Looking back now, Kirat asks herself, how could you have been so stupid? Kirat's shocking story was a hit for podcast maker Tortoise in 2021. Now, 3 years on, Netflix has recently released a documentary which features her recounting her experience. So we can see now that this story was so outlandish, so crazy, so interesting that Netflix heard about it and created a documentary about it. She says that telling her story has prompted others to ask the same question. How can somebody fall for that? It also prompted abuse from some people online. So when you prompt something is to encourage something. For people who might still think I'm stupid, that's fine. You're allowed your opinion, she tells BBC Asian Network News. But Kirat says people shouldn't make assumptions, and countering these was partly what prompted her to tell her story. But Kirat says people shouldn't make assumptions. So she says, I'm not stupid, I'm not dumb, I'm the one that's chosen to speak. I'm the one that's put myself out in the firing line, and I hope others will come forward, she says. So to put yourself in the firing line, this is to put yourself in a vulnerable position. And it's not something that is easy to do. For example, if you're at work or at school or in a position where people are doing or saying the wrong thing, do you speak up about it? It could cause you to lose your job, maybe. And if it does, you'll have to go through a long appeal process. It could cause people to dislike you. And in today's society, being shunned by people is one of the worst things that people can imagine. If we go back thousands of years to times when we were cavemen, to be punished would mean to be ostracized from the group, to be banished from the group, because that meant death. Because now you had to fend for yourself in nature, you'd have to find food and clothing, and you wouldn't have support from other people. So when you're out in the firing line, you have to be incredibly brave and to know that what you are saying is correct and you're telling the truth. Which prompts another question. Why would someone who's been duped in this way put themselves in the public eye? Well, I think she's answered that right there, that she's chosen to speak so that other people are aware that these things do exist. Then she says, we have responsibilities towards our community. Kirat, who's from a Punjabi background, says speaking out was important because she wanted to challenge stigmas in the South Asian community. When someone has a stigma, this is usually negative. They have a stereotype about someone. For example, if we think about mental health, there can be a stigma with some people to talk about mental health, particularly in the South Asian community, because families are quite close together and people are worried about how it affects their reputation or how people view them if someone has mental illness, for example. So then she says, we are so scared to open up about these issues, she says, because of how a community will be seen by a wider society. The victims in our communities keep suffering. This is quite interesting because she is exposing and trying to encourage people to think about these issues. Kirat says her dad's reaction to her story is a good example of what she means. He doesn't want to know what happened, she says. Why is that? Why is he burying his head in the sand? Why doesn't he want to know what happened? Because to face up to what happened and how horrific it was, it's going to be painful. I love my dad and I know my dad loves me, she says, adding, it's a different set of values that he has been brought up with. So this is quite interesting that she is almost in a way condoning what her dad's reaction is, because yes, he may have a different set of values, but he's still not acknowledging what happened. So I think sometimes to talk about difficult things, to accept that it's painful, is something which is really powerful and very beneficial. Kirat says she hasn't spoken directly to the real Bobby about what happened, and puts this down to the community's reluctance to have difficult conversations. She wonders if her experience would have been the same if she'd come from another background. I'd be making different decisions, she says, because we have responsibilities towards our community. You have the pressure of family. So this can be very interesting because this can cause people to get into situations that are very difficult when this is life. These things happen. And I think being open about it, it takes away the other person's power. If people can look at what happened and accept that this wasn't Kirat's fault, but hey, we should support her. But we can see how within the community, there is a lot of pressure. I don't carry the victim mentality. Despite some negative reactions to the retellings of Sweet Bobby, Kirat says she would rather deal with questions up front. If you do see me, don't be scared to approach me, she says. And if you want to say something which might be controversial to me, it's okay. Let's have a discussion about it, she says. When Kirat's asked if speaking to a podcast or documentary producers has given a sense of closure, she's less certain. So to have a sense of closure is to feel mentally well. When you have closure, if you think about when you've read a book and you've closed the book, that's it. It's finished. And when you have closure, you've experienced acceptance. For example, when you have a breakup, a relationship, you have closure when you've accepted that the relationship is over. It can be the same way when someone has passed away and you have closure at the funeral, or you could have closure in your own way, maybe having a personal goodbye to someone. So she's not too sure that making the documentary has given her a sense of closure. Simran rejected offers to be involved in the documentary where she's played by an actress. Kirat successfully brought civil action against her cousin, receiving compensation and an apology at the end of the case. A statement from Simran included in the show says, "This matter involves events that began when she was a schoolgirl. She considers it a private matter and strongly objects to what she has described as numerous unfounded and damaging accusations." Kirat says Simran hasn't faced any criminal charges and wants her to be held accountable. "I'm not okay with that person being out there," says Kirat. There's another question that she's no closer to answering: why? Kirat doesn't think she will ever truly find out what drove the campaign against her. "I think I've long given up," she says. "The extent to which that person went, you can't ever justify it. I can't understand why you didn't stop. What gave you pleasure from hearing somebody in pain?" But not having answers is not stopping her from moving forward in life, including dating again. "I'm working really hard, harder than I should have to right now to rebuild my life and career," she says. "I don't carry the victim mentality around with me. I don't want to be that person." So a victim mentality is when you believe everything is my fault. And it can be something which a lot of people can have. For example, you may not have had the best childhood or relationships or opportunities, and you may be justified in saying my life is terrible because this and this happened. And at some point you have to think about, how can I turn this around? So rather than being the victim, you're not ignoring what happened, but you are mentally strong. So you're saying, hey, I can overcome these things. I'm going to carry on working towards goals and dreams. So this was quite an interesting article, an interesting story. I would love to hear your thoughts on this article. So it's nice to think about some questions first, Now, some questions we could ask are, for example, catfish. Have you ever been catfished before? Have you known any stories about people that have been catfished? Now, this person in particular, how was she able to be catfished for such a long time? So it went on for 9 years. So she didn't meet this person for 9 years. Now, you may think initially that's a crazy amount of time, but as we've gone through, she trusted this person because they had close friends. And this is how social media works. If you think about information that you get, if someone sends you a story, a very close friend, you're more inclined to trust them than to go and fact check. So it's understandable, but the length of time and also the person that was doing the catfishing, why were they doing this? What was their incentive? Was it to cause pain? Was it boredom? Was it to see how far things can go? And it makes you question why someone would want to cause pain to another person. It's quite disturbing if you think about it. And it opens up other questions about the community, about being able to talk about things that are painful. But I think it's excellent that she is talking about this, she's being open about this, and I think the community will be forced to change and adopt new cultural values and understand that these things do happen, but by giving support, raising awareness, there is no shame in this. There's actually power in this because we are all human, we are all in the same boat, trying to experience life, trying to live a happy and fulfilling life. And if someone can talk about their problems openly, the community can work together to help and overcome these problems. So I think this is quite a fascinating story. So I hope you found this interesting, and thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a fantastic day, and I will see you in the next lesson. Bye-bye.